What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Good people out there in the world, good people out in the world. Can you feel me? Can you feel me? Can you feel me? This is Hype Jones coming to you live and in living color, full press, hard press, whatever kind of press you want to call it is. It is what it is, and I'm just going to tell you like it is. Today, I really wanted to have a heated discussion in reference to what's going on across the state of Georgia. It's a continuation of a conversation we had last week, week before last, in reference to how African Americans are being removed from the narrative as far as politics is concerned. I'm going to take a deeper dive locally in the state of Georgia, across the whole state of Georgia. You've had several municipalities cross over into a threshold as far as changing the demographics when it comes to leadership within these communities. You've had several communities be challenged as far as the narrative is concerned. Hey, Rebecca, how you doing? You've had several communities actually winning those successful challenges. And then you also saw a lack of voter participation across the state of Georgia. Now, this lack of voter participation across the state of Georgia can be attributed to multiple things, but I think one of the biggest things that we want to contribute to is I think the background noise, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whatever party you're affiliated with, the background noise that I'm hearing in these streets is this. Hold on a second. The background noise that I'm hearing in these streets is this. There's a lack of trust in the political system. And because of that lack of trust in the political system, you're seeing more and more people not participate in this political structure. And so what's happening is because a newer generation is not participating or a middle-aged generation is not participating, and it's all being led by an older generation who, regardless, whatever politics there is, whatever politics it be, they're going to still participate because they understand that if they don't vote, then we get the politicians we get. Because there's a lack of, I guess, with lack of conversation, a good set of politicians to actually run in these political streets. What's happening is we're not getting people to show up to the polls. And this isn't the trend that started this year. This is a trend that goes back almost 20, 25 years in non-presidential, non-gubernatory election cycles. We just don't see that rigmarole. We don't see that political aptitude that everybody just shows up to the polls and become a part of the voice of the stream of the narrative that controls their local politics. We just don't see it in these I guess off-cycle elections, as they call them, where we're not talking about your governor, or you're not talking about your president or those other tier seats. We're talking about more or less in your municipalities and making sure that we have good governance locally, because a lot of people fail to realize that all politics is local before it gets into the national scene. And so because of this conversation, we keep losing out on good local policy that could feed into the narrative of having better policy across the board. And so when you see communities where you do actually have younger people actually out there running for politics, running for position, you're starting to see changes. I can't give you any examples right now, but I can tell you this: with the changeover that's happening right now, I'm looking forward to some communities that did step forward, even in low numbers, that chose to change their community, their community structures, and I look forward to actually seeing some changes in those areas. And so, at the same time, I also understand the migration of why younger people tend to move away from cities or municipalities that pretty much doesn't have government structures for them. You can kind of see the abandonment of why younger African Americans would leave an environment they may have grown up in, they may have known all their life, and move away from that environment to a government structure or to an environment where it's more befitting to them, which they feel they can get a job, they can get an opportunity, they can, their vote counts and their political prowess counts to them. And so because we're seeing this narrative across the board, there's going to be a great migration, a great change. And so what we ask people to do is two things. I said this before, I'll say it again. Two things need to happen. I think we just need to identify candidates in our community remove the party structures out of the way, but identify candidates in the community who can read and understand and know the narration of politics, who can read and understand how infrastructure design affects us not just today, but how it affects us 10, 15 years from now. Making sure that we are in control of the narrative structure is very crucial to our environment. But a lot of that has to do with the conversation of understanding who we vote for and who we put in these political positions. If we continue to put the wrong, or not necessarily wrong, but antiquated individuals in our political stream, then we're going to keep antiquated policy out there. I can't give you any better narrative than that. If you want to have better, more migrative politics, then you have to do what you got to do as far as making that thing happen. And so, I put this out here to pose the question to you out there. And that question is, I need help understanding why aren't people showing up to the polls? Now, I can give you the hype speech and I can tell you why I feel that people aren't showing up to the polls, but it's bigger than just me, it's bigger than just you. It's got to have a reason beyond repair of we just feel we're not a part of the political structure, we're not a part of the political stream. At the same token, yes, I get it. Bad politicians don't create good policy. Bad politicians don't create good infrastructure design. Bad politicians create these narratives, but at the same time, when we don't show up to the polls, you get what you got. If you don't show up and actually run for office, you get what you got. And so my thing is, if we're not willing to step forward, support candidates or push candidates that can actually drive the narrative forward for us to be a better environment, then we're accepting what it is when we get the politicians what we get. And so, my challenge to you out here in the community is help me understand going into next year, because next year is what you call a partisan year. Next year is a year when you have a Democrat versus a Republican. Now, is it time for the age-old question? Is it time for the age-old question for us to start looking at, and I'm speaking specifically to the African-American indigenous populations that are from those community structures that feel like they have been ignored for decades, been ignored for millennia or whatever time period you think you've been ignored. Is it time for the age-old question in a partisan race next year, where we say we're going to abandon the Democratic Party, we know we don't trust the Republican Party? Is it time for us to start saying that we're going to be independents because we want to force a narrative of making sure politics works for us as well? Is it that time? Is it that time for us to make sure that we say, hey, no longer are we going to accept the fact that the Democratic Party is not really pushing the narrative or the black agenda, if you want to call it, for the African American community? Is it time for us to have that conversation? Or is it that, because we understand, and I want you to understand this clearly, the Republican Party understands that they're not growing Republicans no more. So they're going to make whatever advantages they can possibly make to get more African Americans to join in the Republican Party. And so these are strategies that we need to be discussing as far as the black community is concerned. The first strategy, like I said before, is this. If you don't feel that we have the right representation, who is out there? Who can we get behind to represent us so we can make sure that we can change the narrative that actually exists in our position? I think a lot of times we feel, someone says, Joe Blow says he's going to do this, that, gets elected. January 1, gets sworn in, and then January 2 just sells out the community. I get it. I see it. I get it. But the problem with us is when they sell us out on January 2nd, we let them get reelected January 2nd, 4 years later, because all they come to us and says, hey, I apologize for misusing you. I apologize. I couldn't get the agenda. I apologize. I couldn't do nothing better for you. And then we accept them and we give them a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth chance at giving us absolutely positively nothing. And so when people fail you, I learned this a long time ago. When somebody failed me once, if you give them a second chance, first time, shame on you. Second time, shame on me. And so a lot of times we go back out there and we give people a second chance. And sometimes it is what it is, but it don't have to be that way. And so my thing is, yeah, we can call them out. Yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we can say that. but you can call me out all day long. If I show back up on the politics, you can call me out all day long. And I'm talking about Hype Jones. You gonna call Hype Jones out all day long. I win 4 years later. You called me out all 4 years, but nobody runs against Hype Jones. You just made me even more powerful because all you did was just call me out. You weren't smart enough to make sure that somebody ran against me. So therefore, I could be held accountable to my actions. And so those are the things we have to talk about in our community. I know it sounds repetitive. I know it sounds redundant. I know it sounds like, well, Hype J just wants to talk, just to talk to talk. No, Hype J wants you to understand. Hype J wants you to understand that if you're not willing to run for public office, if you're not willing to step up, if you're not willing to do what you're supposed to do, then we're going to have to accept the changes that come. Miss Betty, you are absolutely right. You are right about that. We do need to change the narrative. Terry Mobley, yes, this is live. It is live in living color. It's cold outside. I wouldn't wear this hat any other day, but it was 47 degrees when I walked out my house today, and I'm bald headed, so I had to put my hat on. Put them in the cage. I'm bald headed, and I had to put my hat on. And so it's so important that we actually understand how do we go and address these issues. Now, we can talk about people's actions when they're actually in the position. We can talk about the policy that has failed us tremendously over and over again. We can talk about the politicians who failed us over and over again. We can talk about all the rhetoric we want to talk about. But if you're not willing to make sure that things change, you're going to keep failing. Margot, I'm going to tell you what my producer's going to say. When you got large statements like that, make sure we break it down. But I'm going to read what you said. A lot of people don't understand the dynamics of local politics, local elections, council, and commission. These elections are most important for the foundational change on the larger scale. You're absolutely positively right. Terry Mobley, I will probably run for office, but I'm not going to make an announcement of when I'm going to run for office on the strength of the lines right now are being redrawn. And I don't want to make a false statement out there making a claim that I want to run for office and I don't know what I'm running for. So that's the reason why I have not put out there stated or even put a comment out there if I plan on running for office. My goal right now, my understanding right now, today, as of today, what I plan on doing is continue to work with candidates like I've done last year, like I've done this year, and I plan to do it next year because we have some very, very, very important elections coming up in next year. And it's more important for me to work with those candidates and work with the environment. And like Ms. Margot said, work with the community to make sure we get a better educated voting base so we can actually work our community right. And so that's my answer to that conversation that I want to make sure. Margo, you're absolutely right. You hit it spot on. But my question to you is, how do we get people to wake up and understand that they need to be a part of politics, not just on election day, but they need to be in politics 24/7, 365, every day, all day, up and down, around the corner, and everything under the sun. Until we get people to understand that, we're just going to be, just having good, casual conversation. I can say this, and nobody gives me credit for this, and I don't toot my horn because you know what? It's very important for us to understand it's not about the small wins, it's about the bigger picture. And I think that we have made a lot of progress for getting, and you're welcome, Terry. We have made a lot of progress as far as getting a new set of elected officials out there in our community. I just think that we need to make a secondary or tertiary progress on report as far as making sure we get the education out to our community. Too far gone are individuals, and there's nothing wrong with having difference of opinion. There's nothing wrong with having different scopes being brought to the community. There's nothing wrong with different conversations being brought to the community. There's nothing wrong with all those things right there. But what we have to do if we want to get that base educated is we have to bring the language to the people. I think what we're missing at, Margo, if I really want to really push it, is my thing is, first off, I think we need to go back to old school, back to the basics as far as knocking on doors and talking to people in the churches and talking to people in the community and finding out what the needs are. If you understand anything about politics, politics is related to everything. Last week I saw the Georgia Power is getting ready to have a power hike as far as electricity is concerned. Now, understand this: in the worst time of the year, when we like to cut that heat on, because we can transpose without the AC, but we like to cut that heat on in the wintertime because it gets very, very cold outside. And so my thing is, when you're talking about increasing the electric bill from $1 to $2, that means if you're getting the average electric bill of $200 a month, now that electric bill is $400 a month. And so now guess what? I can't afford to pay my electric bill 2 months go down the line. Let's come February, the electric heat cuts off. That's the coldest month. That's the coldest month of the year. And so if you're not getting water, you're not getting heat in your house in February, that puts the kids successful to flu season. That gets them successful to being sick. That causes all kind of other problems that we have out there. But watch this. It's tied to politics. Because if you rewind back in 2020, you had two people who finally contested what you say the Public Service Commission, which the Public Service Commission makes sure that people like Georgia Power, entities like Georgia Power and the water company and all these other things stay regulated within our environment to ensure that the people can get the best service possible. But when you got counties like, and I'm gonna beat up my county where I'm from, when you got counties like Chatham County, that the sole electric service, listen what I'm saying, there's a monopoly on electricity in Chatham County. Georgia Power has a monopoly in Chatham County. There is not one other county in the Southeast region that has the problem that Georgia Power has over Chatham County. And what that means is they regulate all electricity in Chatham County. You can't get a break in Chatham County without Georgia Power being in charge. And those things like that are problematic. But we had an opportunity to go to the polls last year. We actually had an opportunity to flip 2 of those seats last year. Now, next year, we're going to have that opportunity again to be able to flip that seat. If we don't show up to the polls, if we were to show up to the polls last year in 2020, then showed up to the polls in 2022, we would have the majority of a five public service commission. And guess what? We can start having real people conversations about how government structure works. And Margot, I just gave you a breakdown, an easy, simple breakdown of how the state of Georgia actually works. Now, the other piece is this. Next year, you have a governor's race. Next year, I'm going to say it again. You have a governor's race next year. And when that governor's race comes, that governor's race, we talked about it 2 or 3 shows ago, is the executive branch. They're the branch that signs everything into law that's brought to them by the legislative branch, which is the Georgia State House and the Georgia State Senate. Now, guess what's going on right now as we speak? Because a lot of us did not show up to the vote. We have a Republican Georgia House and a Republican Georgia State Senate. And so guess what those two bodies are doing? And I'm not talking about the U.S. I'm talking about Georgia. We're talking about just Georgia. We're just talking about Georgia. We have those two entities have written out laws like Senate Bill 202. Senate Bill 202 is now a law, like my good friend Tanea Thomas will tell me out of McIntosh County. It is a law now. It is no longer a bill. It is a law now. And that law, guess what that law did? And me and my good friend, dang, he gonna get mad at me. Mr. Murray, brother Carl Murray, me and my good friend, brother Carl Murray, witnessed this with our own eyes. Senate Bill 202, there's a clause in Senate Bill 202 that states that on election day, the only place you're allowed to vote at is at your own precinct. I'm going to say that again. On election day, the only precinct that you're allowed to vote on is at your home precinct. You know who that is targeted to affect? That's targeted to affect African Americans. You know why? Because a lot of us don't know where our precinct is, number one. Number two, we relied on the Board of Elections. We relied on those locations throughout the Chatham County that we didn't have to vote at our voting base. We can vote on a neutral voting base that allow us as people to be able to vote. Do you realize how many votes that at least in Chatham County, and I pick on Chatham County, anywhere from 10 to 20% of voting population depended on that piece right there. And guess what? That's gone now. So when we talk about why it's important for us to show up to local elections, Those people are voted on by us. And when we don't show up, then we get the wrong representation that takes out the rules and regulations. Now, my thing is, and I'll get beat up. I'll get beat up for my next statement. I'll get beat up for my next statement. But I don't care about getting beat up. Some of that stuff in Senate Bill 202, I don't have a problem with. I don't have a problem with, because you know what? It is time for us to make sure. And how I look at things, and I'll tell you right now, and I'll get mad. Then somebody get mad. You know, Eddie Gresham told me this a long time ago. He said, Jay, instead of fighting against something that you know is not right or may not be right, why don't you read it and adapt yourself to fit the confines of that something? So therefore, guess what? Now you're moving forward. Then guess what? You're not complaining. You're not calling it out. You're not affected by it. And I think that's such a strong point, because guess what it did? All it did was it just made us where we have to be more aware and more conscious of what we do and how we should be involved in this election process. Now, mind you, people will get mad at me about my association, my friends who I dwell with, because my goal is not to make enemies. My name is to make sure my deal is not to make enemies. My deal is to make constant friends and people I can communicate with. And my thing is, when you make enemies, that means you put a breaker between you and somebody, and therefore you and that somebody can't communicate no more. That's not my principle in life, because if you keep making enemies out there, then eventually you ain't gonna have nobody to talk to. And so my thing is not to make enemies out there. My thing is to be able to disagree with somebody and call them out for their actions in private. Now, if I call them out in private and they ain't heard it, then I'm gonna call them out in public. I have no quarrel with that. But the first thing what we should always do is we should make sure that we hold each other accountable. We should be our brother's keeper. I think it should be a clause that everybody who actually voted in the elections on Tuesday should make it a point of finding 5 to 10 people themselves and make sure those 5 to 10 people show up when the next election comes, May the 24th. Y'all can write that date down now. May the 24th is the next election date. That will be what we call the Georgia primary. That's when everything that represents the state of Georgia in between now and May the 24th, I'll educate you on all that stuff. But it's so important for us to understand when we should already have in our minds, when's the next election date? In my mind, May 24th is the next election date. What is May 24th? That's the primary for the state of Georgia. That's when all the primary candidates for the state of Georgia is going to be on that ballot. You know what else is going to be on that ballot? That's going to be when we vote for whoever's going to be in the first congressional district. In my sense, as far as who's going to represent me on the Democratic ticket or the Republican ticket, because this is an open conversation to everybody. That's going to be the date when I'm going to vote on the partisan race all the way down the ballot. That's when I'm going to go into a ballot box, me personally, pick Democrat, because they're going to ask me if I'm a Democrat, Republican. I'm a Democrat. I'm going to go in there and say I'm on the Democrat ballot, and I'm going to go down the ballot from the governor. I'm sorry, take it back. I'm going to go all the way to U.S. Senate, U.S. House, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Ag Commissioner, Attorney General, Insurance Commission, Labor Commission, the Public Service Commission seat. And I'm going to have to make a point of who my state rep, who going to be my state Senate. I'm going to have to make a point of all these positions on May 24th. You know why I know May 24th? Because I'm a concerned citizen and I care about how my roads look. I care about how my child's school looks. And that's the other piece. The school board. Once again, I said this 4 years ago. Tanya Howard Hall, I see you out there. If you're 8th district, that's who I always vote with, because she's always been out there putting the language. But in the school board, I'm going to tell you right now, for all my people who live in the county I live in, Chatham County. Chatham County is up for election. I'm going to tell you straight up. 5 seats. Y'all see it. 5. I ain't talking about a $5 foot long from Subway. 5 seats are going to be up for office. That first seat is going to be the president, the person who writes the agenda and controls the narrative, will be up for office. If you have problems with COVID-19, you have problems with Corona, you have problems with the buses, you have problems with anything else under the sun, and you don't show up on May 24th to vote up or down or who you put, if you don't show up as far as being somebody on that ballot, you see I ain't chose nobody other than Tanya, and I know Tanya. That's the only reason why I chose Tanya in that conversation, because she follows my show, and I'm going to follow those people who follow me. And so that's why I shouts out to Tanya. But if you understand anything, those 5 seats are going to be up for grab. 5 seats. The chairman, president, the person who controls the narrative will be on that ballot. And on top of that, you'll have the 4th district, the 5th district, the 7th, no, not the 7th, 6th district, and the 8th district. 5 seats, controlling interest. If you want to control the narrative, if you were mad about the buses, if you were mad about how we handle COVID, if you were mad about anything under the sun, if you mad, and I'm not mad at anybody else, but my thing is, and I think that our superintendent, Dr. Yvette, I think she does a good job of trying to do what she can do. She has to juggle all kind of things, and a lot of that failure of things she probably could do for us is on us as an electorate, because we're not showing up the polls to make sure she got a good school board up there that can help her move the narrative. My thing is to come talk to her and say what kind of things she likes to do, and then find her outside of the school system and say, look here, what are the things we need to be doing to make sure we get you in that seat? That's what we should be doing as far as politics is concerned. Because let me tell you something right now. Our school system has been hijacked from, guess what? Economics. Economics controls our school system. I've seen more advertisement for voting yes on a splosh than I've ever seen in my life. And my thing is, I think this is a waste of money on a lot of different angles and a lot of different issues, because guess what? Splosh number 1 was done on the electric year that we forced the narrative of having all 93, 94 polling places were open on Tuesday. That means everywhere, like Pooler and Savannah, that didn't have elections, had to have the polls open. That means we spent a whole lot of money. And do I think the school system did that right by us? No. I understand why they did it and when they did it. And I think is what we need to be doing is holding the school system accountable for understanding that we should have did that splosh at a different time period. We should have did it at a different time period. I got to fix my hat, y'all. We should have did that at a different time period, because you know what? We spent a lot of money in the Board of Elections to make sure that all 94 precincts were open for an election that didn't even bring in 20% of the electorate body. And so my thing is, we need to be more cost friendly as far as when we put splosh out there. I think we could have put the splosh out there in the Mays primary next year, and guess what? We'd have been able to spend a hell of a lot less money, and then we could just concentrate it on the 165th, which was a special election in our community, and in all those municipalities that actually have elections. I think we could have had a full off year if all these municipalities had switched over and switched over to the other odd year, and then guess what you can do then? Then you can take 1 year to do a full reset of the Board of Elections. You can do 1 year full reset of voter registration. You can take a full year and get a full year out where you don't have any elections. And instead of having these hit or miss elections, we could take a full year to get your revenue streams together, polling stations together. We do a full reset. Take the 3 years out. Take the year where we have the governor's year. Take the year we have Savannah and Pooler's elections and Garden City's election, and move all those other small elections into that year. And then my thing, we can only, and you can't hold back on special elections, because special elections are special elections. You can't hold back on those. So if you had a special election, that's cool. But we shouldn't have any elections in this year cycle, because think about all the revenue that the general people that pay into taxes, the money we would have saved by holding on that money, and we could have took that money and turned it into learning and educating the base. There's so many other options we can do out there. Now, I know somebody out there is probably mad at me for putting that out there, because somebody was out there happy about the splash. I voted yes for the splash, y'all. I voted yes for the splash. I'm always going to vote yes for the splash, even though I understand the underlying temptation, what goes on with the splash. I still vote yes, because guess what? In the end, my kids in Chatham County are going to get better resources out of it one way or another. Now, I don't blame how other people get into that money pit and take away those money holes that come down from the splash. I don't blame them for it. I blame us for not showing up to the polls to make sure we have good school board representation, to make sure that the policies and procedures, to make sure that the bylaws, not the bylaws, I say infrastructure design, to make sure that anything dealing with school system is taken care of. If we do what we got to do first, which is show up to the polls, and I'm going to say it again, just in case somebody miss it out there, because we always tend to miss it out there. I'm going to say it again. May 24th of next year is the next time we vote on 5 of those seats in my community. And I can tell you right now, this is not just my community, it's communities across the board that have this same kind of election. And there is another piece locally in our community on the Board of Elections. I think not every community has it where the Board of Elections members are on the ballot. In my community, we do. And guess what? It's bipartisan as well. And guess what? Those people are the most important people when it comes to elections throughout the years, because they determine how up and down, how everything is run with the Board of Elections. They determine how many precincts we need to have, who has a precinct, who don't have a precinct. They determine everything dealing with the electorate process. And guess what? We give them a buddy pass, and we don't hold them accountable in always as we should too. And so when we look at these pieces right here, we got to do better job as far as making sure that we, yes, you said, hold folk accountable. Make sure we doing what we got to do when it comes down to it. Melinda, if you still out there, I saw you ask a question. If you can go and repost that question, I'll see if I can get the producer to go ahead. It was a question put out there, Miss Producer, that Melinda put out there. If you find that question and put it back up here, I'll be glad to ask it. Okay, I asked a question on the other page regarding voting as an independent. And so, Melinda, what is your question as far as being an independent is concerned? Because with this right here is based, I'm looking at one platform. Even though we're being broadcast on 4 platforms, we only can see one platform, which is the ATR platform that I can see. Now I go back and answer the questions. But my concern, and I'll ask the question until I see you ask the question again. My concern, and I revert that conversation, was early in the conversation. If you're just now getting on, you're just now listening. Early in the conversation, there has been a lot of conversation in reference to has the Democratic Party as a whole across the United States of America failed African Americans? Have they? No, and you don't vote for in independents. You don't vote for independents in primaries unless you're a libertarian and you got 2 libertarians on the ballot, which I've never seen in my lifetime. Maybe on the presidential side, but not locally. The process as an independent, since you asked that, Rebecca, and then I'm gonna go back to Melinda's question because it's going to allude to that piece right here. The point of an independent is this: you have to get X amount of. You got to get X amount, and I wouldn't even put that up there. You have to get X amount of people to sign a petition in order to be an independent, as far as in the primary is concerned. That is pretty much how independency works. You have to go in that district. I think it's between 5 to 10%. I don't know the exact number. I used to know it. And with that number, you have to depend on you have to get X amount of people in your thing to sign a petition to be on the ballot as an independent. You will end up on the November ballot, and you don't have to have those signature 2%. Thank you, Rebecca. And you will end up on the November ballot, and you don't have to be in a primary because you'll be written in as an independent. And so my question earlier was, is that the choice among African Americans? Is this something we need to start seeking as far as getting away from the left, getting away and being afraid to join the right because of the racist ties and the historical background? Now, mind you, I'm going to also say right this: the Democratic Party has its racial ties too, but I'm not going to get into that whole discussion right there. But in modern day terms, the Republican Party has been more geared toward the racist ties than anything else in our system. The Democratic Party in recent times has been criticized on the national scene as far as not being able to be not doing enough when it comes to the black community. We all saw what happened to the Haitians that came over here, that migrated over here, that tried to get away from Haiti. And then we also talk about the conditions in Haiti, and they don't have the supplemental things in Haiti to be able to take care of these people, and these people trying to get away from that. And then what we did was put them back on a boat and we sent them back to Haiti. And a lot of people uproar about that, and they raising the conversation of discrimination. And so my thing is, I'm not here to form an opinion on that, up or down, right or left on, but I do not understand how, we're so quick to make sure that they were deported back quicker than most other migrant people who come over here trying to see, refugees trying to seek refuge. I think that we should have had a better conversation about that. I think we acted extremely fast to get them out of our country. And my thing is, when we talk about how extremely fast we actually acted, I just don't get along with and get with it. But back to the conversation of independency. When we talk about being independent, we're talking about not taking on the resources of the Democratic Party anymore. And I'm just going to say the Democratic Party because most African Americans are aligned to the Democratic Party. If we're talking about taking a stance as African Americans to push a black agenda, because when we do these things and we become independent, we're also becoming independent of the resources that the Democratic Party does provide. And so my thing is, it may not be a lot when it comes to that resources, but there are some resources tied to the Democratic Party that do benefit us. But I think that what we should be doing as African American before we annex ourselves or move away from the Democratic Party is, I think what we should be doing is we should be looking at the Democratic Party structure and say, okay, Democratic Party, here are the issues in the black community that we know that we need you to address on behalf of us. We know these issues. We know these problems. We know these things affect us as African Americans. We know you understand that affordable housing is an issue when it comes to poverty that never got addressed. When we were released from slavery, there was no affordable housing given to us. And here we are almost 300 years later, we still screaming the fact that there are no affordable housing structures built for us. Now, you can say that y'all created the projects and all that stuff like that, but even with that, that wasn't a conversation for us. That was a conversation for poor whites who migrated from rural areas into municipal area, into bigger city areas to get jobs and everything like that. And they got what they needed to supplement up to move them out from the projects into better housing. But what we were put in those conditions, and guess what? We were left in those conditions and not served. So when we look at those kind of states of minds, when we look at those kind of pieces, what is being done as far as affordable housing? What is being done? And my thing is, you can do all kind of programs, you can do all kind of resources and anything like that. But what is being done across the board to ensure that if that structure is not working, you're creating another structure that does work? When we look at crime, we always talk about the word crime. We can create task force, we can create organizations, we can create everything under the sun. But if you look at that crime is a byproduct of what? Poor education system, poor housing structure, poor economics, poor opportunity to get better economics. When you look at that and you look how it's recidivative, when you look at it, it's repetitive as far as a problem is concerned. When you continue to look at it as being a problem, and we're not trying to address the problem because we understand we want to keep a group of people at a certain mind frame where they're not becoming an asset in our community, they're more of a liability. And what you're always doing is you're trying to create a younger audience to keep this liability going. Then you create this opportunity of failure. And so when you look at communities that have 20, 30, 40% poverty is concerned, but then you look at those communities, you got 20, 30, 40% minorities in those populations, and you have not created workaround situations to help these people out, then you create the only opportunity. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day, where they have created I forgot what the apprenticeship program. There's an apprenticeship program out there. It's being funded by local government. The apprenticeship program is doing an excellent job. Okay, but watch this. Your local government structure is giving revenue or giving assistance as far as helping the apprenticeship program become a good apprenticeship program. But then when these people graduate from the apprenticeship program, the government structure is not ensuring that projects coming from the government structure aren't requiring union workers or workers that's tied to those apprenticeship programs. So then you're putting these people in these apprenticeship programs. These people go through the apprenticeship programs, but there's no jobs because you have done nothing to insulate your government structure to be able to hire these people, to create the opportunities for these people. And if private industry is not creating the opportunity for these people when they go through these apprenticeship programs, so now you got carpenters who can't work. You have electricians who can't work. You have welders who can't work. Now, I understand there's opportunities out there for these people, but if you're not creating a broader scope for these people to become independent as far as into those systems is concerned, if you're not doing 20%, 30%, and yes, I said it, in communities, you should be closely matching the narrative of your minority population. That's the narrative of your DBE participation should be close to. It shouldn't be you got 40% African American in the community and you only got 10% minority participation. That's way off the scale because you're not trying to fix the narrative of poverty. If you got 40% 40% African American, and you got another 40-50% women-owned business, when you talk about the narration like that, but you only have 10%, I'm gonna say it again, 10% minority participation, then you're failing your community because you're buying into the system that pre-existed before we even started having these conversations. And then when you got minorities at the leadership that's not pushing for these kind of conversations with DBE, disadvantaged business enterprises are not given the opportunity to participate, once again, you are further disabling your community. And so when you look at why you have systematic racism and you have long-term economic differences in our community, you're going to keep having these things until you come up with policy that's actually going to address those narratives. A lot of us, we're afraid to drop policy out there. You know, a lot of us will skirt around and not really put politics or policy up there because they're worried about what the other people got to say about them. If we're not willing to challenge the system, we're accepting the woes that come before us. And so with that being said, you're right, Margaret, we have to be accountable to these things right here. Terry, you're right. Adaptation, we have to be willing to adapt. Malvise, one of my good young cats here, going out there getting his education. Malvise, I appreciate you making sure you participate in this conversation because it's so important for us to do. A lot of y'all may think that I'm rambling, and yes, some of it is rambling, but a lot of it has to do with we have to put dialogue out there in our community to address the problems. Because my thing is, it's time out for us making sure that we have closed door conversations. It's time up for us to make sure that we're speaking to each other, making sure we're talking to each other, and making sure that we're putting forth what needs to be addressed in our community. Shouldn't municipalities be able to dictate industry coming into their communities by pushing job recruitment? When you say that, how we should as local government is this way. If you want to build, let's say you want to build, and I'm gonna pick on the narrative of one of the cities that just changed over. A lot of its elected leaders got changed over because they were tired of the politics that was being. And this is one of my municipalities, one of the fastest growing communities in the state of Georgia, Port Wentworth. Okay, so now you have a new structured government in Port Wentworth. You have 5 people who probably identify themselves with the Democratic Party now, where it was 5 people who identified. So you had a total flip in government structure. The only problem that you got right now is the mayor, and the only problem you got with him is he sets the agenda. But even with him setting the agenda, Robert Rules dictates if you have a super majority, you can override him and add things to the agenda as you please. And when you have 5 people to 2 people, you're able to do that, Marco. And so the answer to your question is this: before anybody who wants to, they can purchase the land because they can purchase the land because we're in America, and America is a capitalistic society. However, before they can construct, they have to get a permit from the city. And so how you do is, and you're absolutely right. In that situation, the mayor doesn't vote. So you're absolutely right. But what you have to look is this: a person can come in and buy the land. I can buy me 70 acres of land. There's nothing that prevents me from buying that land. However, before I can build anything on that land, I have to get building permits. I have to make sure it's zoned right. It's so many different loopholes that the government structure can hold them accountable. Now, that doesn't say that that person can't come and sue you. What it says to you is if they want to build within your zone, then you need to let them know they have to come to you to get permits. And so what I foresee for the next 2 years is it's going to be a lot of heated discussions as far as how we and who we give permits to. If we prevent permits from going up in those areas, people are going not going to want to build in Port Wentworth the way they've been building in Port Wentworth. And so what will probably happen is, of those 5 people, and I'm warning you now, Margo, We can write this date down. Today is 11/5/2021. What they will do is they will do what they can to get two of those people to switch sides, so therefore they can have the 2+1 they got, which is 3, and then the mayor will have the opportunity to vote because it'll be a 3-3 split. And guess what? Down the middle, that's when the mayor can vote in those situations, those conversations. But back to what you were saying earlier, municipalities can't do that, but what they can do is they can create opportunity zones. They can change the zoning where it prevents certain bills from happening. So if you think that you have enough warehouses, hint, hint, in Port Wentworth, then y'all can make sure the zoning is against any future warehouses being developed in that community. Now, mind you, that's a tall order for a small municipality to take on. But my thing is, what you should be concentrating is, what ways can you generate revenue without having to depend so much on the revenue of warehousing? Because that's what's coming here. Because if you don't know this, warehouses is the big thing for Chatham County. Because you know what? Chatham County ports went from 1.5 in 2015 to 2.8 in 2017-18 to 4.9 million units coming into that port last year, and they're expecting to hit anywhere from 14 to 15 million units coming into the port. And so what they need plenty of storage spaces. And so people are actually looking for warehouses locally to be able to store all these goods and services. And all they are, economics is always 10 years ahead of the rest of us. And so all they're doing is they're building to warehouses stuff that's coming 10 years from now. It ain't about today, it's about tomorrow. And so what we have to do is we have to play the game of making sure that we're watching what's going on tomorrow and not just focusing on today. And I think that's all. And it goes back to our earlier conversation. All this is tied to politics. Understanding how your community is very important. I think that what we should be doing and concentrate on is and you also got to understand, planning and zoning is only a recommendation source. They're not a final source. Their job is to make sure that you're given how this decision is going to impact the community. That's all planning and zoning. Your municipality is the one who actually up or downs any kind of things. And I know you know this, but just so we can know with your question, no problem with planning and zoning. Voting power to change zoning is what is happening. And you're absolutely right. And that's why it was so important that y'all change the city council, because the city council does two things. They're the ones who make the appointments of planning and zoning, number one. And they're also the ones who accepts or rejects the planning and zoning recommendations, number two. And so that's why, going back to why it's so important for cities, municipalities like Port Wentworth to step forward and say, look here, we're tired of this. We're tired of what we're getting screwed. And so we need to change out the government. And so that's why it's so important that government structures like Port Wentworth now has a different structure where it's more people oriented on the city council, minus the mayor. But the mayor, like we said earlier, doesn't have a vote. And so my thing is this. And so, Margot, that means you have a 4-1 vote as far as what happens with city council. And the mayor should never have the opportunity to vote. But I'm gonna remind you again, today is November the 5th, 2021. They're going to find a way to identify, of the 5 y'all got, they're going to find a way to identify which 2 they can flip so they can be able to move the narrative of economics. Because economics is not a black or white thing. Economics is not a black or white thing. It's a green thing. And whatever green dictates, whatever green needs to be maneuvered to make the narrative happen, that's what we're going to do. And so we have to make sure we're paying close attention to that. It's going to be crazy because they're going to planning and zoning should be revolving to become a better isolated group of people that's tied to real estate people, that's tied to people from the community, that's tied to all kind of walks of people. And that's what we need to make sure we change. Already started. We are in the top of, okay, y'all on top of it. And that's a good thing that we need to make sure we follow through on, because that's where they steal the government resources from. So now I'm at the 10-minute mark. I'm getting ready to close on out. I really want to make sure we focus on and recapping the conversations we had. We fail because we refuse to get educated. This last Tuesday was another example of low voter turnout. In some areas we won, some areas we lost. I think we should have had more victories, and we still have some victories to come on November the 30th across the state of Georgia, because we have some runoffs out there too. But we lost some battles, we won some battles on November the 2nd. We learned some things, and we're going to learn even greater things when it comes to 2022. It's upon us to make sure we take the time to educate ourselves. It's time out for us waiting for somebody to give us the answer. It's time up for us to start learning what's going on in our community and stepping forward to run for public office. I will tell you this. They're in general session right now with the State House and the State Senate. Georgia House, Georgia Senate, right now, they're in session, and they're getting ready to redraw all the lines. They're getting ready to make all kind of changes to your community, the community that you live into, to make sure that the representation does not match the community. Because guess what? They don't look at these things today. They look at these things every single year. We wait to get into the conversation when the census tract comes. They've already had the narration of the conversation the whole duration of the 10 years. We got to stop planning at the last minute. We got to start planning right now for 2030 and work the plan all the way to 2030. And we got to stop being bamboozled. We got to stop accepting what comes before us, because if we keep accepting the narrative, then we're going to keep becoming second, third, and even fourth class citizens. And it's not by design for us to be able to make it. It's designed for us to just be a working class people, to follow the narratives so people get rich, the richer get rich, and the poor just stay poor. And so if we want to make sure we change this narrative, we have to step up to the gate. We have to show people the reason why it's important for them to run. And sometimes, and I said it before, and I said it again, and y'all go and tell the Democratic Party I said this. Sometimes if it's meant for us to have this courageous conversation, for us to step out of the shadows of being Democrats as blacks, and it's for us to become more independent thinkers and making sure we have an agenda, then we need to do so. But my thing is this: before we do this, we got to stop voting blindly as Democrats. And when people come to represent us as Democrats, we need to give them, this is the black agenda. Check off the boxes, the items that you're going to be able to line up with. And you don't say, if they say to get back to you later, then say, okay, my vote won't count for you because I'm going to go with somebody else and put somebody else against you. This is the thought process we need to have. We can't hold the Democratic Party accountable if we're not giving them a black agenda. Number one. Number two, if we're not at the table, then how can you say you ate? And a lot of times we fail because when the food is on the table, we over there playing something else. We ain't made our way to the table. And if we don't have representation at the table when the Democratic Party is doing things to make decisions on behalf of us, then who are we mad at? We have to be, as a people, at the table. We have to be the ones making sure when the turkey get cut, when they cut 2-3 pieces off, we need to take the knife out their hand and we need to start cutting pieces of the meat too to make sure we getting a piece of the turkey too. But if we're not at the table, we're what you call on the menu. That means they're going to put us on the table and they're going to eat us alive too. And so if you don't want to get eaten alive, then guess what we got to do? We have to make sure, and sometimes we got to bring our own knife to the table, and we got to bring our own fork to the table, and we got to bring our own plate to the table. But if we're not willing to step forward and do those things, and we're unwillingly accept the things that's done for us, then guess what? We're going to keep getting the crumbs that be fed to us. And so you remember this: we were never given affordable housing when we were removed from slavery state. We were never given economic prowess or economic ability or economic opportunity when we were removed from those slave states. Why do you think 230 years, 240 years later, they're going to give us anything now? I don't expect it, because you know why? Because if they didn't have to give it to us the last 220, 230, 240, 250 years, and every time we went out there and built our own bases, they tore it down. Why do you think that? Why do we still trust them? Why do we still trust economics? Why do we still trust the privilege? I don't understand it, but you know what? I'm here to make sure to ask the question. It is what it is, and you'll keep getting what you get until you're willing to challenge the narrative. And so I'll close it out on that. I think we got about 5 minutes left. I don't see any I don't see any questions. I appreciate Margot. Y'all please text me, text me if you can. Let me know if you have anything. To that person who put that long text message out there, yeah, we deleted. Yeah, I said it. We deleted, and I'll delete any other message that goes out there, because you know what? You want to be disruptive, go home and be disruptive yourself. But you know what? On here, we're here to educate African American people so they can understand that It's a cold world out there, but if we stick together and we're willing to get into the conversation, if we're willing to challenge the narrative, we can do better. We need more Democrats who are more progressive. You're absolutely right. And Melvise, that's going to happen with time regardless. It'll happen with time regardless. But what's have to happen is we can get liberal progressives to come up and step forward. But if we're not willing to change the questions, we're not willing to challenge the narrative, I can say it before and I say it again. Locally, you have to start. You have to start the small minions. You have to start the small. Someone told me this a long time ago. You don't take a pig and try to swallow it whole. What you do is you cut it up in pieces. Once you cook that joker, you cut it up in pieces. And then guess what? You start eating that pig. And that's how we do it. That's how we do it. That's how we take away the pig. And I'm telling you right now, my conversation may sound choppy and messy right now, but I tell you, come January, when we really start hitting this thing, that's when we're really going to start hitting this thing. And that's when we're going to bring the politicians who are not afraid to talk on or speak about a black agenda for our community here in Georgia, here in Chatham, here in Savannah, here in Pooler, Port Wentworth, all the communities that I put my feet on. If you're not willing to talk about a black agenda, an agenda that's going to move black people forward, because guess what? Black people in the state of Georgia have the lion's share when it comes to the Democratic Party. If you're not willing to have that conversation, then you're not willing to take my vote. And if I got to write my own name in, I'll encourage thousands to 10,000s to 100,000, even to millions, to make sure that they go ahead and put somebody else's name in a hat, because it's time out for us not being on the table. It's time up for us to make sure that we have a black agenda and we speak on behalf of that. And so with that being said, Miss Producer, I'm going ahead and count it out. In less than a minute, we're going to walk away from the stage. If you want to, please take the time every Friday, 8 o'clock. We're going to have these conversations. Chime in. Ask your questions. Ask your questions. Ask your questions. Ask your questions. Hey, all I can tell you, Margot, because I ain't got much time left, and y'all be asking these questions when I got to rush. All I can say is this. What I ask you to do is go out there, find young people, find people with the heart of mind and goal who may not have the financial resources, and help them run for public office. Even if they don't win, with them in the race changes the narrative, because it brings the voice to the table and it brings more people to the table. And so what I ask people to do, young people especially, is put the skin in the game, like Ms. Margot said, and be willing to run and be willing to take a chance at that progress. And so with that being said, Miss Producer, you can go ahead and close us out. Love y'all. See y'all next week Friday.